Hi AP Econ, this is an instructional video to cover one of our more difficult concepts, which is the Keynesian cross, a completely different graph, a completely different way of looking at the economy. This one is relatively tough, but before we get started, I want to throw out there that this is not something that you'd be heavily tested on. I'm doing this to really introduce you to a couple terms and to kind of highlight a different way of looking at economics. This is one where if you don't really go on and pursue economics, I don't think you would ever see it again. And if you went on and you majored in economics or finance, something like that, this is a graph that I'm going to show you today that really has a lot of analytical tools that I would probably be honest and say that my knowledge of calculus doesn't really allow me to apply. But in the future, you may be different. So maybe this is a little introduction to something that you might see a little bit more. Okay, so again, this is the Keynesian cross, and it kind of starts with a little bit of Keynesian assumptions behind it. The first thing, if you remember the kind of the difference between the classical and the Keynesian curve in an aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve, we know that a Keynesian is not quite as concerned about inflation and price level as somebody who follows a classical model. Okay, so a Keynesian cross kind of takes price level. If we understand that a long run aggregate supply curve is kind of not dependent on price anymore, at that point you kind of take price out of the equation, and you're able to graph stuff a little bit differently. Okay, so there's one major kind of assumption behind looking at a Keynesian cross curve versus our aggregate supply, aggregate demand curve. This curve that we're going to look at today does not really regard price level. Okay, another thing, and remember as we're going through this, if it seems complicated, make sure to go back to the solid definitions that we really need. At the end of the day, this is very easy to apply, even if you don't understand everything that I'm saying here. Okay, now one thing that hopefully we do understand, and this is going back to one of the very first lessons that we learned this year, is the circular flow model of a market economy. Okay, so I wanted to start off with that to give us a reminder that that theoretically the amount of goods and services that consumers buy from firms would equal the land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship in the factor market. And the fact that these two markets kind of theoretically balance out, that would give us kind of the opportunity to graph them, I guess it would say, against each other. Okay. Now, one thing, and I just want to throw this out there from a definition point of view, one thing and one vocabulary word, John Maynard Keynes was very concerned about what he called investment leakages. Leakages probably being the key word there. And that would be where, instead of capital flowing to American companies, people would take their money and that, their money would leak out of out of one country's economy and instead invest in another economy. So I don't think we would really be tested on this, but it could come up. The idea is, investment leakages, and John Maynard Keynes kind of believed that the government should kind of step in and make up for that money with government spending. So just a little vocabulary word there that has to do with that circular flow model, which really is a background for this whole graph. Okay, so when we look at the two axes, kind of think of them in kind of in terms of a product and a factor market. Okay, so there's a little background on kind of where we're approaching this model from. In the second video, I'll introduce you to the model, the axis, and try to give us a shot at understanding what it's saying. Okay, thank you.